I'm going to take a few moments to talk about implementing the camera and checkpoints. But the very first thing we want to take a look at before any of that good stuff is the number of scripts we are going to have when all is said and done. Okay, we noticed a couple more here. We have the camera controller, checkpoint, coin script, level manager, and the one we've been working with the most often, the player controller. We are going to get the completed code from all of these scripts here. Now, this assignment page is not completed yet, but regardless, when it is completed, when you're able to view it, this link will be at the top. So we can click here to view the scripts you will need. You can go ahead and save it to your Unity folder. Might not be a bad idea. This is a zip file or archive, and once we open it, we'll see the scripts folder right here. We'll just click that, and we see all of the scripts we'll need. So we want to open it up and copy and paste the code exactly as it is, with a couple of exceptions. We want to make sure that the name of the script matches our name in our game. So if our player controller is called Move, it needs to be named that way, or Movement, or whichever. But I'm using the names now that the tutorial video uses just for the sake of consistency. So you have all these good little scripts implemented into our game right here. Now, I'm not going to deal with all of these just yet, but these are the scripts we're going to be implementing in the very near future. So we need to get the camera to follow the player, like this. Some of you have done this already. Well, when we turn left, we are able to view more of the left, and when we turn right, we're able to view more of the right. So in order to do that, we need to, after completing this script, the player controller script, and as well as the camera controller, implementing that, we need to apply the camera controller to the main camera. Now, I went ahead and did that already. When we do that, we have a couple of variables we can mess with. I use these numbers, -10 and 0.75, for offset and offset smoothing. Offset means how much the camera is going to shift over when the direction changes, and offset smoothing is how fast it's going to do so. So we don't want the camera to just warp to one side and the other at the speed of light. That's why I set it to 0.75. So when we do that, we get nice smooth movement. Now, I'm going to transition over to setting up checkpoints. What does respawning mean, first off? That means that when we fall off a level, we will reappear at the start of a stage, or after we pass a checkpoint, we'll reappear at that checkpoint. Now, this version of the game is not set up to do that yet. When we fall off, we just fall forever and ever and ever. But eventually, we're going to restart at a certain position, and after we pass these checkpoints, we'll be able to restart at each one. So respawning just means to reappear and allow the player to try the game again, or to try the level again. We have checkpoints and levels, so we don't have to repeat the same parts of a level over and over again. Like if you're going through a 5-minute level, for example, you don't want the player to have to repeat the same easy 2 to 3 minute part because they kept falling at the 3 or 4 minute mark. You don't have to keep repeating the same parts of the level over and over again. Hence why we are inserting checkpoints. So if the player falls off the stage and no checkpoint isn't reached, as I said earlier, then we're going to just simply start at the beginning of the level in that exact position. So the level manager script will control that aspect of the game. That will control and enable us to respawn at the checkpoints. So that's why we are going to be implementing that in. So the camera controller controls the camera moving left and right, and that's attached to the main camera. And the level manager script controls the respawning. The checkpoint controller actually controls the checkpoints. So hence we have 5 scripts. Now, why doesn't the player respawn after all of these scripts have been created? Because I didn't actually set up everything just yet. Here's what I did set up. The fall detector. So as the player moves through this level, we are going to have an invisible object that we are going to create. So we're going to go to the main camera and go to create empty, and we're going to call that fall detector. So we are going to just position that fall detector underneath the player, and as the player moves left and right, or I should say as the camera moves along with the player, this bar will move along with it. So this bar will always be under the player. So if the player ever falls off, they're going to fall onto this bar, and that will determine when the player can respawn. As soon as the player touches this, they're going to respawn somewhere. So that's what we have set up. So after you create the fall detector, you want to give it a box collider and edit the collider to be, a long rectangle like this. So that's all set. And that's going to be a child object of the main camera. That's why we created it right there. We right-clicked on the main camera to create it. So it's a child object. So what I also want to do, as far as the checkpoints go, is create an empty object called checkpoint. I am going to have that exact name be used because I referenced that in the checkpoint script. And speaking of the checkpoint script, we can just add that to the checkpoint object, and it appears down here. So now for the checkpoint. You notice that the checkpoint is actually this skinny column right here. I went to sprites and I just dragged it in and I renamed it checkpoint. So what else did I do to that? I added the checkpoint script to it. Okay, so it appears down here. And I gave it a polygon collider. You may have to change the order and layer if it appears behind the sky. Just set it to 1, or I would think at most 2, maybe. But in any case, once we do all that, once all these options are set, what I did was I created a prefabs folder, and I dragged it in from the hierarchy into here to create a prefab out of it. That way I can just drag it over and over again, and it has the same settings. Okay, so I can just get rid of that one. I don't have to redo all the settings over and over again. I can drag as many checkpoints as I want. So anyway, now that we have our checkpoints set up, we just need to determine what sprites we're going to use. Well, first off, red and green. In the video tutorial, the narrator uses red and green flags. The flag is red before the player passes it, and then afterwards it turns green. I'm using the same names, but the red flag is going to be represented by the column sprite, and as soon as we reach it, it will turn into a hat sprite. So this thing. Okay, so we just want to click the checkpoint object and drag in the sprites you want to use. So before we pass, or before we reach the checkpoint, it's going to be the column sprite. After we reach it, it's going to be the hat sprite. So we drag those in there. Once we have all the scripts set up, and once we have those settings all set, then it changes into the hat. Past that checkpoint, and there we go. And if I was to fall off here after the game is completed, I would respawn over where that hat is. That's how that stuff works. So to recap, make sure we have all of these scripts that we can get on canvas. Make sure we have the fall detector all set. Make sure we create the checkpoint object. And we decide what sprites to use. And you won't see this option until you drag in the checkpoint controller script. So all those little tidbits need to be done. But once you do have that, you'll be able to have the checkpoints change sprites when you pass them. And in addition, what I did earlier with the camera, you'll also be able to have the camera follow the player. And the fall detector is going to move along with the camera. That's why that bar will always be underneath the player. So the next step after that will actually be getting the respawning to work. So that will come a little bit later. And that is it for now.